everyone, this is Truman again. So we're back in KSP real quick to demonstrate a kind of what I talked about last night with a single stage to orbit aircraft, kind of the holy grail, right, where we could get something into orbit, take off from one way, get into orbit, deploy something, and then return back to that runway, right? So um, you'd have minimal transportation costs. Ideally, you might have to do some refurbishing for reentry, but ultimately, um, the overall cost would be, insignificant because you'd be recovering all the materials and pretty much just spending money on the fuel, right? Um, so there's a couple of technologies related to that. I talked a little bit last night about aerospike engines, but another one in the real world is called the Sabre engine, which is this is a play on it by being the Rapier engine. Basically, uh, the Sabre engine it has two operational modes. Mode one, it will be air breathing, right? So just like a regular jet engine, it combines air with liquid fuel, and it generates thrust, right? Just like a jet engine. Mode 2, it basically closes off those external air intakes and uses internal oxidizers to react with the fuel. The benefit of this is that you can already get up to speed, up to altitude uh, to get you going before you switch over, so you need um, less oxidizer on board, which reduces the overall weight. The downside is that we don't really have a fuel that has both a high thrust capacity as well as a high ISP, and you need both. And you can't really have both, right? They're contradicting terms. So um, anyway, so this is just a little mock-up. I tested it. I know that I can get into orbit with it if I follow the correct flight profile. Um, But basically, we have a bunch of air intakes on this to scoop up air as we're going, and once we get high enough that we can no longer use that air, it's too thin to operate the engines, these will automatically swap over. And if I do the flight profile correctly, then we will just barely get into orbit, right? We actually wouldn't have enough fuel to get back down, but this is kind of a demonstration. Also, there's an enormous amount of lifting surface on this because we want to have positive lift for as long as we can, as high as we can get, so we can focus on that horizontal velocity and then just use the rockets to basically pitch up almost straight up and get us the rest of the way into orbit, and then have minimal burn. And in the real world, obviously that'd be a problem because you'd be talking about getting into very, very high hypersonic speeds, very high up in the atmosphere, or else you would have all sorts of aerodynamic force problems and stuff. And so it creates something of a definite engineering challenge in making a craft that's light enough to be effective at doing this and has the strength to resist those sorts of aerodynamic strains and speeds. So quick throttle up here, using our brakes to kind of hold us down a little bit so we can get spool up, thrust a little bit, but don't run out of. Now, so they model air intake as just a flow of units, right? It requires a certain number of units in order for it to be an air-breathing engine. But as we get up to altitude, you'll see the amount of intake air that we're getting drastically drops. And the way they're modeling this in game is simplified, right? But it does actually kind of represent what happens in real life, right? As you get higher and higher and higher, the air becomes thinner. You have significantly less oxygen content, which makes the engines no longer be able to operate as efficiently. And the design of an engine that's operating near sea level is very, very, very different than the design of an engine that operates at high altitudes, right? Extremely different. And one of the things you can kind of do to compensate for that is you can use what's called a ramjet engine with a modification to use scramjet, where there's there's no compressor or anything, it just uses forward velocity, but the problem there is that you have to get enough forward velocity to utilize those engines, right? So it's kind of a no-go scenario. Anyway, so you see now our flow is rapidly dropping as we're getting higher and higher. And also, we're going over a kilometer a second, and we're basically up in the midst of the stratosphere on Earth. Yeah, it's totally unrealistic. For a kilometer a second. And here, as soon as the airflow drops below, there we go. Now we're in rocket mode. So now we're going to pitch up. We're going to try to gain as much altitude as possible. Luckily, we are at a higher high altitude, so we don't have the same atmospheric drag that we might otherwise have. So we can kind of afford to just pitch straight up. And we're going to aim for about 85 kilometers, I think. Yeah, that works. All right, so now we'll add our maneuver node. So basically I'm using this to help guide what kind of burn I need to do in order to circularize this orbit. And see, we're high enough up, our control surfaces wouldn't work in this thin atmosphere, so I have some RCS thrusters on here to kind of help us pitch over a little bit. I'll execute a quick roll just because it doesn't really matter, we're in space, but I'm just OCD like that. Okay, so this burn is going to take 63 seconds, so at 31-ish is when we need to start this burn. We're in orbit, and oh, that's actually more or less circular. Hey, good timing. We have just barely enough fuel that we might be able to re-enter. So let's see if we'll time accelerate around. So our goal is to actually get back to that space center, right? Let's see if we can pull this off. I'm terrible at this part, so you'll have to forgive me if we fall way short. But, alright, so in orbital mechanics, right, if we want to optimize the amount of fuel that we're using, we would want to do burns on the opposite side of the orbit from what we want to have happen, right? If I want to re-enter over here, actually, I really wanted to re-enter over here, and then we'll have air drag forces that'll kind of bring it down. So let's go a little bit past the apoapse, but you'd basically, in order to be most economical, you would do a burn on the opposite side of the orbit from where you want the actual action to happen, right? So, let's see if we can, yep. Well, it gets us into the atmosphere, so we'll see how this works, huh? No, probably want to, no. So we're going to keep pointing this way, because when we get around to the other side of the planet, this will actually be oriented for re-entry, so more or less. Now, the problem is, I have no fuel, right? So this is going to come down wherever it's going to come down. Now, if someone was actually good at, planning and flight planning and knew all the statistics about lift and, was an actual engineer and not me, then you would be able to, plan where you would need to re-enter and when you would need to do that burn in order to land appropriately. But here we go. The other problem that you would have is obviously this is going to have to re-enter. There's going to be enormous aerodynamical strains on this, right? That you would have to overcome in the real world, and it would have to be heat resistant. The space shuttle kind of succeeded at this, kind of. They had to develop new ceramic technologies in order to make that happen, right? Um, it was not an easy thing. Let's turn off our RCS here. We're also going to reduce our angle of attack because I'd rather actually come down over. We can flare up and bleed off speed as we get closer to the space center, but um, we are yeah, we are going to be wanting to resist as much as possible here. Oh, woo. Hang on, let me take off the time acceleration. So now I have to be very careful um, because I don't want to overshoot the space center, right? But we're going to start getting significant drag forces as we get lower and lower. We are, however, going to put down somewhere. Okay. Let's see, so. Here we go. We need to raise our angle of attack because we need to bleed off a lot more speed. Yeah, I'm gonna way overshoot the space center. Oh well, it's okay. That's what happens. Oh, oh no. Welp, rip. Come on. Ah. So obviously we would be dead in the real world. Anyway, you get the idea. So I'm just a terrible flight planner. So yeah, I hope that kind of demonstrates a little bit better, like single stage to orbit, or another view on the idea of single stage to orbit. It doesn't just have to be limited to talking about rockets and stuff. It can actually be alternative ideas like these. So anyway, thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.